The stars around New Valoria burned with the light of dying ships. Commander Vexara pressed her scaled hand against the cracked viewport of her flagship and watched another Zalari vessel explode in the distance. The Korthak Empire had been attacking for 3 days straight, and her people were losing badly. Her communication officer turned toward her with fear in his large, dark eyes. "Commander, the last defense platform has fallen. The enemy is moving toward the civilian sectors." Vexara closed her eyes for a moment. The Zalari had never been warriors. They were teachers, artists, and scientists. Their ships were built for exploration and trade, not war. When the Korthak Empire had arrived with their massive warships demanding surrender, the Zalari had tried to negotiate. The Korthak response had been to start shooting. "How many civilian transports escaped?" she asked. "Maybe half, Commander. The rest are trapped on the planet." Through the viewport, Vexara could see the green and blue world that had been her home for 40 years. Cities that had stood for centuries were now burning. Museums filled with art from across the galaxy were being destroyed. Libraries containing knowledge from 1,000 worlds were turning to ash. "Send the distress signal," she ordered. "Full galactic broadcast. Tell everyone what is happening here." Her communication officer nodded and began working at his console. Within minutes, the desperate message was racing across space to every major civilization in known space. The signal carried images of the destruction, recordings of Korthak forces killing civilians, and a simple plea for help. The first response came from the Altarian Republic within an hour. Vexara felt hope rise in her chest as she opened the message. Then she read the words. "The Altarian Republic regrets that we cannot provide military assistance at this time. We wish you luck in your negotiations with the Korthak Empire." More responses followed. The Centauri Alliance expressed sympathy, but explained they had their own border conflicts to worry about. The Trade Federation offered to buy any Zalari refugees who made it off-planet, but could not risk their ships in a military action. The powerful hegemony of worlds sent a formal note explaining that they had a non-aggression pact with the Korthak Empire. One by one, every major power in the galaxy found reasons to refuse help. Some were afraid of the Korthak. Others had treaties or trade agreements they did not want to risk. A few were honest enough to admit they simply did not care what happened to one small world on the edge of known space. Vexara read each rejection with growing despair. The Zalari had always believed that civilization meant helping those in need. They had sent aid to dozens of worlds over the centuries, sharing their knowledge and resources freely. Now, when they needed help, they found themselves alone. "Commander," her tactical officer called out. 3 more Korthak ships just entered the system. They are heading straight for the capital city." Vexara looked at her remaining fleet. She had started the battle with 12 ships. Now she had 3, and all of them were damaged. The enemy had more than 20 vessels, each one larger and more powerful than anything the Zalari could build. "Sir, we have one more response to the distress signal," the communication officer said. Vexara almost did not want to read it. She had received 37 rejections already. What was one more? But duty required her to check every message that might save her people. The response came from a ship called the USS Sovereign. Vexara had never heard of it, and the species identifier showed human, another name that meant nothing to her. The message was short. Message received. "We are coming to help." "Hold on, who are the humans?" Vexara asked her intelligence officer. The young Zalari worked at his console for several minutes before shaking his head. "Very little information, Commander. They appear to be a relatively new species from the Outer Rim. No major military actions on record. Most galactic powers classify them as primitive but harmless. How many ships are they sending?" "The message came from one vessel, Commander." "It appears they are sending just the one ship." Vexara felt her heart sink. One ship from an unknown species that everyone considered primitive. It was not much hope, but it was the only hope she had. At least someone in the galaxy still cared enough to try. "How long until they arrive?" she asked. "Based on the transmission origin, at least 6 hours if they have decent faster-than-light engines." 6 hours. Vexara looked at the tactical display showing Korthak ships closing in on populated areas. Her people might not have 6 hours. The enemy was not interested in taking prisoners or occupying the planet. They wanted to make an example of what happened to worlds that refused to surrender immediately. "All ships, this is Commander Vexara," she broadcast to her remaining fleet. "We have held the line for 3 days. Help is coming, but we need to buy them time. I know our ships were not built for war, But our people are counting on us. We fight until the end. The responses came back immediately. Her captains were afraid, but they were ready to die for their world. The 3 damaged Zalari ships moved into formation and began their final charge toward the Korthak fleet. As plasma fire lit up space around them, Vexara wondered about the humans who were coming to help. What kind of people would risk their lives for strangers? What kind of ship could one primitive vessel possibly send that would make any difference against the Korthak Empire? She did not have long to wonder. Her flagship shook under enemy fire, and warning lights flashed across her bridge. The hull was breaching in multiple sections and life support was failing. Around her, the crew worked desperately to keep the ship fighting for just a few more minutes. Outside, the other 2 Zalari ships were burning. One was already drifting dead in space, its crew either dead or evacuated. The last ship was fighting 3 Korthak vessels at once, its weapons barely scratching the enemy armor. Vexara activated the ship's emergency beacon and began recording a final message. If the humans arrived and found only wreckage, at least they would know what had happened here. They would know that the Zalari had fought to the end, and they would know exactly what kind of enemy they were facing. As she spoke into the recorder, telling the story of her people's last stand, Vexara found herself hoping that whoever these humans were, they would be smarter than she had been. She hoped they would take one look at the Korthak fleet and run back to wherever they came from, because she was beginning to suspect that the galaxy was not a place where good people survived for very long. The USS Sovereign dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the new Valoria system, and Captain Jake Morrison immediately understood why 37 species had refused to help. The Korthak blockade was massive and terrifying. 12 enormous warships hung in space like metal predators, each one easily twice the size of the Sovereign. Their hulls were painted in dark colors with jagged designs meant to intimidate enemies. Weapon ports covered every surface, and their engines glowed with the red light that had become the signature of Korthak military technology. "Captain, I am reading heavy damage to the Zalari defense fleet," Ryan Carter reported from his tactical station. 2 ships destroyed, 1 drifting without power. The 3rd is still fighting but barely holding together. Jake watched the tactical display as the last Zalari ship tried desperately to avoid the plasma fire from 3 Korthak vessels. The alien ship was clearly outmatched, its shields failing and hull showing multiple breaches. As he watched, one of its engines exploded, sending the ship spinning out of control. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Korthak fleet," Kate announced. "Put it on screen." The main display filled with the image of a Korthak commander. The alien was huge and reptilian, with dark scales and red eyes that seemed to burn with cruel intelligence. His armor was decorated with the skulls of various species, and when he spoke, Jake could see rows of sharp teeth. "I am War Master Drekthul of the Korthak Empire," the alien growled. "You will surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your vessel and the execution of your crew." Jake stood up from his captain's chair and walked closer to the screen. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations, but he could feel the tension on the bridge. Everyone knew they were about to make a decision that would probably get them all killed. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet," he said calmly. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system and release all prisoners. Comply, or we will make you comply." The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the hum of the ship's engines. On the screen, War Master Drekthul stared at him for several seconds as if he could not believe what he had just heard. Then the alien began to laugh, a harsh sound that filled the bridge. "One primitive ship against the might of the Korthak Empire," Drekthul said. "You humans truly are as insane as the reports suggest. Very well. Your deaths will serve as an example to other fools who think to interfere with our conquests." The transmission ended, and immediately the Sovereign's sensors showed all 12 Korthak ships turning toward them with weapons charging. "All hands. Battle stations," Jake announced over the ship's communication system. "This is not a drill. We are engaging a superior enemy force to protect innocent civilians. I know the odds are against us, but we are going to show these bullies what humans do to people who hurt the helpless." "Captain, they are targeting us with everything they have," Ryan reported. "I count over 200 weapon systems locked onto our position." Jake sat back down in his captain's chair and strapped himself in. "Lisa, how are those modifications coming?" "Weapons are at 120% of normal power." The chief engineer's voice came through the communication system. Armor has been reinforced with emergency bulkheads. Life support is rerouted to give us 30% more power to engines and shields. Ryan, implement Pattern Alpha. Sir, Pattern Alpha has never been tested in actual combat. Then today we find out if it works. Execute. What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for the next 100 years. Instead of trying to fight at long range like every other species, the Sovereign accelerated directly toward the Korthak formation at maximum speed. The enemy fleet opened fire, sending hundreds of plasma bolts and missile salvos toward the human ship. But Ryan had spent months studying Korthak tactics, and he knew they were used to fighting enemies who tried to avoid damage. No one had ever flown straight at them. The Sovereign's shields absorbed what hits they could while the ship's armor deflected the rest. Jake felt the deck shake under his feet as enemy fire found its mark, but the ship kept accelerating. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as systems took damage, but no one called for retreat. 30 seconds to weapons range, Ryan announced. Lisa, cut gravity and life support to non-essential areas, Jake ordered. Route all power to forward weapons. The artificial gravity cut out, leaving the crew floating in their seats held down only by safety straps. The bridge lights dimmed as power flowed to the weapon systems. On the main screen, the lead Korthak ship grew larger and larger as they raced toward it. 10 seconds to range, Ryan said. The enemy is trying to adjust their formation, but we are moving too fast. Fire everything, Jake ordered. The Sovereign unleashed its full armament at point-blank range into the side of the lead Korthak dreadnought. Laser cannons, plasma torpedoes, and kinetic rounds all struck the enemy ship within seconds. The alien vessel's shields collapsed under the concentrated fire, and explosions ripped across its hull. But Jake was not done. Ryan, implement ramming sequence. Captain, that will probably destroy us too. Do it. The Sovereign's engines roared to full power, and the human ship slammed into the damaged Korthak vessel like a guided missile. The impact sent both ships spinning through space, but the human ship's reinforced hull held together while the alien dreadnought broke apart in a series of massive explosions. 1 down, 11 to go, Jake said as the crew worked to regain control of their spinning ship. Lisa, damage report. Hull breaches on decks 3 and 7, but the emergency bulkheads are holding. Forward weapons are offline, but we still have our rear guns. Engines are at 60% power. Ryan, where are the other Korthak ships? They are trying to surround us, but they seem confused. I do not think they expected us to ram their lead ship. Jake smiled grimly. That was the problem with bullies. They were used to fighting people who were afraid of them. They did not know how to handle enemies who were more angry than scared. Set course for the nearest Korthak ship, he ordered. If they want to dance, we will give them a dance they will never forget. The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Sovereign fought like a wounded animal, using tactics that no military manual had ever described. They rammed ships fired at point-blank range and used their smaller size to hide behind enemy vessels while shooting at their allies. Ryan implemented attack patterns that treated the Sovereign as both weapon and shield, spinning the ship to present different armor sections to enemy fire, while never stopping their own attacks. Lisa kept the engines running at dangerous power levels, pushing the ship's systems far beyond their design limits. And through it all, Jake kept his crew focused on one simple fact. Somewhere on the planet below, innocent people were counting on them to hold the line. No matter how bad the odds got, no matter how much damage they took, they could not give up because that was what humans did. When everyone else said something was impossible, humans just got more stubborn. Captain Jake Morrison stood in front of the main display screen on the bridge of the USS Sovereign and studied the tactical information streaming in from New Valoria. The numbers were not good. 23 Korthak warships against whatever was left of the Zalari defense fleet. His ship's computer estimated the defenders had maybe 2 hours left. Captain, I have to ask if you have lost your mind, said Chief Engineer Lisa Brooks. She was a small woman with grease-stained hands and the kind of direct personality that came from spending years keeping machines running in impossible conditions. We are talking about the Korthak Empire. They have conquered half the outer rim. Jake turned to look at his senior staff gathered around the bridge table. He had served with most of them for 8 years, ever since the Sovereign had been assigned to exploration duty in unknown space. They were good people, and they deserved an honest answer. Lisa is right to be concerned, said Dr. Amy Foster from her position at the medical station. The Korthak are known for taking no prisoners. If we interfere with their operation, they will hunt us across the galaxy. Ryan Carter, the ship's tactical officer, was studying the enemy fleet composition on his personal display. 23 ships, Captain. Each one bigger than us. Their smallest destroyer outguns our heaviest weapons. Jake nodded. He had read the same reports. The Korthak Empire had built their fleet for one purpose: intimidating enemies into surrender before the fighting even started. Their ships were massive, heavily armored, and designed to look as threatening as possible. Most species took one look at a Korthak battle fleet and decided that surrender was the smart choice. Kate, what do our files say about Korthak military doctrine? Jake asked the ship's artificial intelligence. The calm voice of Kate Stevens filled the bridge. Korthak forces rely on overwhelming firepower and psychological intimidation. They prefer to destroy a few enemy ships completely, rather than damage many ships partially. This creates fear in surviving crews and often leads to mass surrenders. And what do their files say about human military doctrine? Jake asked. There was a pause before Kate answered. According to galactic databases, humans are classified as a minor species with limited military experience. Most records describe human forces as primitive but unpredictable. Jake smiled at that. The galactic community had been studying humanity for 50 years, ever since first contact, and they still did not understand what made humans different. The reports he had read were full of confused observations about human behavior that made no sense to alien minds. One report from the Altarian military described a human merchant vessel that had been attacked by pirates. Instead of surrendering or fleeing, the crew had rammed their ship into the pirate vessel and then boarded it with improvised weapons. The report noted that this behavior was illogical and potentially suicidal, but had resulted in the pirates fleeing the area. Another report told of human colonists who had continued fighting against impossible odds for months, even after their military leaders had been killed and their heavy weapons destroyed. The enemy commander had eventually given up the attack, stating that the humans appear to be insane and cannot be reasoned with. The truth was simpler than the aliens realized. Humans just had a different relationship with losing than most species. When other species faced certain defeat, they surrendered to save lives and fight another day. When humans faced certain defeat, they got angry and started looking for ways to hurt the enemy as badly as possible before going down. Captain, Ryan said, I have been running combat simulations. Our best-case scenario gives us a 12% chance of survival if we engage the Korthak fleet. What about worst case? Jake asked. We die in the first 5 minutes. Lisa Brooks crossed her arms and stared at Jake. So why are we doing this? I mean, I am not against helping people, but this is suicide. Jake walked over to the display screen and pulled up the recordings from New Valoria. The images showed Korthak soldiers executing Zilari civilians who had been trying to surrender. Children and elderly beings shot down in the streets. Ancient libraries and art galleries being destroyed just for the fun of it. Because this is what happens when good people do nothing, Jake said quietly. The Zilari sent out 38 distress calls. 37 species found reasons to say no. We are the only ones willing to help. But we are just one ship, Amy protested. So? David was just one guy with a sling when he went up against Goliath. Ryan looked confused. Who is David? Old Earth story. Kid fights a giant and wins because he does not fight fair. Jake turned back to his crew. Look, I am not ordering anyone to do this. If you want to put in for transfer when we get back to Earth, I will approve the paperwork. But I am not going to sit in space and watch innocent people die because the enemy has bigger guns. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, then shook her head. You humans are all crazy. You know that, right? She paused. But if we are going to do this, I want to make some modifications to our weapon systems. The Korthak might have bigger guns, but they have never fought anyone stupid enough to get in close. Ryan pulled up tactical displays and began working. I can adapt our attack patterns. Most species fight at long range and try to avoid damage. If we get in close and use hit-and-run tactics, we might be able to confuse them. Amy was already heading for the medical bay. I will prepare for casualties. And, Captain, I want to study the biological data on Korthak physiology. If we are going to fight them, we should know how to hurt them. Kate's voice came through the speakers. Captain, I should point out that human military history contains numerous examples of small forces defeating larger ones through unconventional tactics. However, the casualty rates in such actions are typically quite high. Noted. Kate, set course for New Valoria, maximum speed. As the Sovereign jumped to faster than light travel, Jake remained on the bridge and thought about the galaxy they lived in. 50 years ago, when humans had first traveled to the stars, they had expected to find adventure and new friends among the alien civilizations. Instead, they had found a galaxy ruled by fear. The strong preyed on the weak and everyone else looked the other way. Species like the Zalari, who tried to build something better, were destroyed by empires like the Korthak, who only understood violence. And meanwhile, the so-called civilized powers sat in their comfortable territories and pretended it was not their problem. Maybe it was time for that to change. Maybe the galaxy needed to learn that there were still people willing to fight for what was right, even when the odds were impossible. Jake had read the psychological profiles that alien governments kept on human behavior. They all came to the same conclusion. Humans were dangerous because they did not know when to quit. When any reasonable species would surrender, humans would just get more stubborn. The aliens thought this was a flaw in human psychology. Jake was beginning to think it might be exactly what the galaxy needed. War Master Drakthul stared at his tactical display and tried to understand what was happening to his fleet. In 30 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like the human ship's fighting style. 3 of his dreadnoughts were destroyed, 2 more were badly damaged, and the rest of his formation was in chaos. "Sir, the human vessel is moving toward the Bone Crusher," his tactical officer reported. "They appear to be preparing another ramming attack." Drakthul watched as the small human ship accelerated toward one of his remaining vessels, its hull scarred and burning but still fighting. The captain of the Bone Crusher panicked and began firing wildly, hitting 2 of his own allied ships in the process. "Order all ships to maintain formation," Drakthul growled, "and call for reinforcements from the outer system. Sir, that will take at least an hour for them to arrive. Then we hold the line until they get here. One human ship cannot defeat the entire Korthak Empire." But even as he spoke the words, Drakthul felt doubt creeping into his mind. His crews were starting to panic, something that had never happened before. The humans were fighting like they had nothing to lose, and it was affecting the morale of his warriors. On the USS Sovereign, Captain Jake Morrison felt his ship shake as another enemy salvo found its mark. The bridge was filled with smoke, and half his control panels were dark. 3 of his crew were injured, and Dr. Amy Foster was moving between stations treating wounds while still analyzing enemy tactical data. "Captain, I have been studying the Korthak formation patterns," Amy called out over the noise of battle. "Their ships are designed for long-range combat. When we get in close, their big guns cannot target us effectively." "That is why we keep getting in close," Jake replied. "Ryan, status report." "We have taken out 3 enemy ships and damaged 2 more. Ryan said from his position at the tactical station. "But we are down to 40% power, and our forward armor is nearly gone. Lisa, how much longer can you keep the engines running at this level?" "Maybe another hour if we are lucky," came the chief engineer's voice through the communication system. "But Captain, I have been working on something special for our Korthak friends." Before Jake could ask what she meant, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. 8 more Korthak warships were entering the system at high speed, moving to reinforce the blockade. "Well, that changes things," Jake said quietly. "Ryan, how many ships are we facing now?" 16 functional Korthak vessels, with 8 more arriving in 20 minutes. "Captain, we cannot fight those odds." Jake looked around his damaged bridge at his injured crew. Any reasonable captain would order a retreat. They had already done more than anyone could have expected, holding off the Korthak fleet long enough for most of the Zalari civilians to escape to the outer planets. But as Jake watched the tactical display, he saw something that made his decision easy. The surviving Zalari ship, which had been drifting powerless, was suddenly moving again. Commander Vexera had gotten her engines back online and was limping toward the battle. "Kate, open a channel to the Zalari ship," Jake ordered. "Captain Morrison," came the voice of Commander Vexera. "My ship is badly damaged, but we still have weapons. We will stand with you." "Commander, you should evacuate your people." "We can hold the line." "No, Captain. You came here to help us. Now we help you. That is what allies do." Jake felt something shift in his chest. For the first time since arriving in the system, he was not fighting alone. The Zalari ship took position beside the Sovereign, its weapons charging despite the damage to its hull. "All right then," Jake said. Let us show these bullies what happens when they pick on our friends. Lisa, now would be a good time for that surprise you mentioned. Already on it, Captain. Ryan, I need you to target the enemy ships with our next torpedo spread, but do not detonate them on impact. What? Lisa, that makes no sense. Trust me. Just get those torpedoes into their hulls. Ryan shrugged and began targeting the nearest Korthak ships. The Sovereign's remaining torpedo tubes fired a full spread, and the projectiles raced toward the enemy fleet. Instead of exploding on contact, the torpedoes punched through the alien ship's armor and disappeared inside their hulls. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Korthak ships began to experience system failures. Weapons stopped firing, engines cut out, and several ships started firing on their own allies. Lisa, what did you do? Jake asked. Computer virus custom designed for Korthak military systems, came the engineer's cheerful voice. I have been working on it since we received the distress call. Turns out their computers are not very well protected against human programming techniques. On the tactical display, the Korthak formation was falling apart. Ships drifted out of control while their crews tried desperately to regain command of their systems. 2 vessels collided with each other, and a third began firing randomly in all directions. But Jake knew the virus would not last long. The Korthak would adapt and find ways to counter it. They needed to press their advantage while they had it. Ryan, target the command ship. Full power to all remaining weapons. Sir, that is War Master Drakthol's flagship. It is the most heavily armored ship in their fleet. Then we better hit it with everything we have. The Sovereign and the damaged Zilari ship both opened fire on the Korthak command vessel. Their combined weapons barely scratched its massive armor, but the attack had another effect. It made Drakthol angry. Enough of this, the War Master's voice came through the communication system. All ships ignore the system failures. Ram the human vessel. Destroy it completely. 3 Korthak ships that still had engine control began accelerating toward the Sovereign. Jake realized that the enemy commander had decided to copy human tactics, using his ships as weapons instead of just firing platforms. Captain, they outweigh us by at least 10-1, Ryan said. If they ram us, we are finished. Jake was about to order evasive maneuvers when Dr. Amy Foster spoke up from her medical station. Captain, I have been analyzing the psychological profiles of Korthak warriors. They are used to fighting enemies who fear them. What if we gave them something to be afraid of? What do you mean? Amy's smile was not pleasant. Lisa, can you broadcast on all Korthak communication frequencies? Sure, but what do you want to broadcast? Human music. Something loud and violent, Lisa laughed. I have just the thing. Suddenly, the space around New Valoria was filled with the sound of human heavy metal music. Screaming guitars, pounding drums, and aggressive vocals echoed through every Korthak ship. The alien warriors, who had never heard anything like it, began to panic. The 3 ships that had been charging toward the Sovereign suddenly changed course, their crews too disturbed by the psychological warfare to maintain their attack. Across the Korthak fleet, communications broke down as crews reported that invisible demons were attacking their ships. Jake watched in amazement as the most feared military force in the galaxy retreated from one damaged human ship and the sound of electric guitars. The reinforcements that had been approaching the battle turned around and fled back to the outer system. Captain, Ryan reported with wonder in his voice, the entire Korthak fleet is withdrawing from the system. They are broadcasting surrender codes and requesting permission to leave. Jake looked at his crew, all of them injured and exhausted, but still fighting. Around him, the bridge of the Sovereign was a wreck, but they had won. Somehow, against impossible odds, they had won. Open a channel to War Master Drakthol, he ordered. When the alien commander appeared on screen, he looked defeated and confused. Human Captain, we withdraw from this system. But know that the Korthak Empire will remember this day. We will prepare for your tactics. Jake leaned back in his damaged captain's chair and smiled. War Master, you can prepare all you want. But here is something you need to understand about humans. We do not just have tactics. We have imagination. And every time you think you have figured us out, we will come up with something new. The transmission ended, and Jake watched the Korthak fleet jump to faster-than-light travel, fleeing the system they had come to conquer. Below them, the planet New Valoria was safe, and its people were free. 6 months after the Battle of New Valoria, Ambassador Carol Williams stood before the Galactic Council and looked out at the assembled representatives of 43 species. The Great Chamber was built to impress visitors with its size and grandeur, But Carol was not easily impressed. She had seen what happened when pretty buildings and fancy speeches failed to protect innocent people. The Speaker of the Council, a tall alien with blue skin and far too many eyes, called the session to order. We are here today to address what many consider to be the human problem. In the past 6 months, human military forces have engaged in 17 separate actions across known space. Carol listened to the list of complaints with growing amusement. The hegemony of worlds was upset that humans had destroyed a pirate fleet that had been operating in their territory for years. The Trade Federation was protesting human interference with their slave markets. 3 different empires were demanding compensation for what they called unprovoked attacks on their expansion fleets. Ambassador Williams, the speaker continued, your species has shown a disturbing tendency toward violence. The Council is concerned that humanity poses a threat to galactic peace. Carol stood up slowly and walked to the center of the chamber. She was a small woman with gray hair and the kind of calm expression that came from spending 40 years in diplomatic service. But anyone who looked closely could see the steel in her eyes. Honorable Speaker, I think there has been a misunderstanding, she said. You seem to believe that the human actions you described were random acts of violence. Let me clarify what actually happened. She activated a holographic display that showed star charts and battle reports. The pirate fleet you mentioned had been attacking civilian transports for 3 years. 17 different species had filed complaints with the Council, and no action was taken. It took 1 human patrol ship 4 hours to solve the problem permanently. The representative from the hegemony of worlds stood up. Those pirates were operating in our sovereign space. You had no right to interfere. Your sovereign space? Carol asked. The same space where you were charging civilian ships protection money to avoid pirate attacks? The same space where you were taking a percentage of the stolen cargo in exchange for looking the other way? The alien representative sat down quickly, his face turning a darker shade of blue. Carol continued. As for the slave markets, the Trade Federation has been buying and selling sentient beings for over 2 centuries. They claim it is legal under their laws, but I would like to remind the Council that slavery was outlawed by Galactic Treaty 400 years ago. Those are indentured servants. Not slaves, protested the Trade Federation representative. Indentured servants who are bought and sold like property, who can be killed by their owners without legal consequences, who are bred like animals for specific traits. Carol's voice remained calm, but her words cut like knives. If it looks like slavery and acts like slavery, then it is slavery. She turned to address the full Council. You want to know what the human problem is? The human problem is that we remember what civilization is supposed to mean. It is not about big ships and fancy buildings. It is about protecting people who cannot protect themselves. The speaker tried to regain control of the session. Ambassador Williams, humanity is a young species. You do not understand the complexities of galactic politics. Oh, I understand perfectly, Carol replied. I understand that the Korthak Empire conquered 47 star systems because everyone was too afraid or too comfortable to stop them. I understand that slave traders operate openly because their customers have economic agreements to protect. I understand that pirates attack civilian ships because the local governments find it profitable. She paused and looked around the chamber. What I do not understand is how you can call this civilization. The representative from the Altarian Republic stood up. The humans destroyed 3 Korthak fleets in the past month alone. They are destabilizing the balance of power. Good, Carol said simply. The balance of power was protecting bullies and murderers. It needed to be destabilized. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding a small fleet of human ships, had sent regular reports back to Earth about their activities. The pattern was always the same. They would arrive at a system where something terrible was happening. Everyone would tell them it was none of their business, and then they would fix the problem anyway. The Korthak Empire had tried to adapt to human tactics, building new ships and training their crews to fight at close range. It had not helped. The humans just changed their approach, using different weapons and new strategies. The last Korthak fleet had surrendered without firing a shot, when 3 human ships had arrived playing classical music and broadcasting poetry. Ambassador, said the speaker, the Council is prepared to offer humanity full membership and significant trading privileges if you agree to limit your military activities to your own territory. Carol smiled, and somehow that smile was more frightening than any threat. That is very generous, but I am afraid we will have to decline. You are refusing Council membership? We are refusing to ignore genocide because it is happening in someone else's territory. We are refusing to let slavery continue because it is economically convenient. We are refusing to let bullies conquer peaceful worlds because everyone else is too scared to fight back. She walked closer to the speaker's platform. You see, there is something you need to understand about humans. We have a very simple philosophy when it comes to evil. We do not negotiate with it, we do not compromise with it, and we do not ignore it because it is happening far away. Then what do you want? The speaker asked. We want the galaxy to be a place where children can grow up safely, where scientists can study the universe without fear, where artists can create beauty without worrying about conquest fleets, where people can live their lives without being afraid of pirates, slavers, and empires that think might makes right. Carol turned to address the full assembly. You can have peace or you can have human cooperation. You cannot have both as long as your peace depends on looking the other way while innocent people suffer. The chamber erupted in angry voices as representatives argued among themselves. Some species were outraged by human arrogance. Others were secretly relieved that someone was finally dealing with problems they had been too afraid to address. Carol waited for the noise to die down, then spoke again. I have one more thing to say. In 3 days, Captain Morrison and his fleet will be arriving at the Zarian system to investigate reports of forced labor camps. The local government has been informed and invited to cooperate with the investigation. You cannot simply invade sovereign territory, the speaker protested. We are not invading. We are investigating reported violations of galactic law. If the local government has nothing to hide, they will welcome our assistance. Carol gathered her materials and prepared to leave. The age of looking the other way is over. The age of convenient blindness is over. The age of protecting evil because it is profitable is over. She paused at the chamber doors and looked back at the assembled representatives. Humanity did not come to the stars to conquer anyone. We came looking for friends and allies in building something better. That offer is still open to anyone who wants to help us protect the innocent and punish the guilty. And if we refuse? Asked the speaker. Carol's smile returned, cold and final. Then you will discover that humans are very good at working alone. We spent thousands of years fighting bullies on our own world. We are prepared to spend thousands more fighting them among the stars. As she left the chamber, Carol could hear the arguments beginning again. Some species would join humanity in trying to build a better galaxy. Others would oppose them and try to maintain the old system of comfortable corruption. But Carol was not worried. She had read the reports from Captain Morrison and the other human commanders operating across known space. Word was spreading that there were people willing to fight for justice, no matter how bad the odds. The galaxy was changing, whether the council liked it or not. And at the center of that change was a simple human truth. When someone is hurting innocent people, you stop them. You do not negotiate, you do not compromise, and you do not worry about whether it is your responsibility. You just stop them, because that is what humans do.